The rumble started as a whisper, barely audible over the laughter of 6 children playing in the snow. Sarah Mitchell looked up from packing their lunch supplies, her mother's instinct prickling with unease. Above them, the pristine white slope of Mount Harrison seemed peaceful, almost serene in the morning light. But that sound, that low, threatening growl from deep within the mountain, made her blood run cold. "Kids, get to the car! Now! Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you." Sarah Mitchell had planned this President's Day weekend as a fresh start for her family. After 18 months of single motherhood, following David's sudden death from a heart attack, she desperately needed to create new memories with her children. The cabin rental in Cascade, Colorado, seemed perfect. Isolated. Enough for healing, but close enough to civilization for safety. What she hadn't counted on was how quickly the mountains could turn from sanctuary to trap. The morning had begun with such promise. 14-year-old Emma, her eldest, had actually smiled for the first time in weeks while helping pack sandwiches. 12-year-old twins, Jake and Josh, were building an elaborate snow fort near the cabin, their competitive banter echoing across the valley. 9-year-old Mia sat reading in a sunny spot by the window, while 6-year-old Chloe and 4-year-old baby Tyler played with blocks on the cabin floor. Sarah had felt something she hadn't experienced in months: peace. The weight of being solely responsible for 6 lives seemed lighter here, away from the bills piling up at home, away from the pitying looks of neighbors who whispered about that poor Mitchell woman. The decision to take the short hike to Eagles Nest Viewpoint seemed logical. The trail was marked as easy, suitable for families, with stunning views of the valley below. The weather report had been clear: sunny skies, minimal wind, perfect conditions. Sarah had checked it 3 times, paranoid about mountain weather after everything they'd already endured. "Mum, do we really have to go?" Emma had complained, her teenage reluctance to leave her phone behind evident. "I promised Madison I'd text her back." "1 hour without technology won't kill you," Sarah replied, shouldering the day pack filled with water bottles, granola bars, and first aid supplies. "We came here to be together as a family." The hike started beautifully. Tyler rode on Sarah's shoulders, his chubby hands tangled in her dark hair, while Chloe skipped ahead, collecting interesting rocks in her small backpack. The twins raced each other up the trail, their energy seemingly endless despite the altitude. Mia walked beside Sarah, pointing out animal tracks in the snow and asking questions about mountain ecology that Sarah couldn't always answer. Even Emma seemed to warm to the adventure, helping Tyler down from Sarah's shoulders when the trail got steep and teaching Chloe how to make snow angels during their rest stops. For brief moments, Sarah could almost convince herself that they were a normal family on a normal vacation, not a group of people still figuring out how to exist without their anchor. The viewpoint was everything the guidebook had promised. Eagles Nest offered a panoramic vista of snow-capped peaks stretching to the horizon, with the valley spread below them like a postcard. The children clustered at the safety barrier, pointing excitedly at distant ski slopes and identifying landmarks they could see from their vantage point. "Look, Mum!" Mia called, her breath forming clouds in the crisp air. "You can see our cabin from here. It looks so tiny." Sarah joined them at the barrier. Tyler balanced on her hip and felt a rare moment of contentment. This was what David would have wanted, his children experiencing the world beyond their small Ohio town, learning that beauty existed even in their grief. They had been at the viewpoint for perhaps 20 minutes when Sarah first noticed the change in the mountain's mood. What had been a gentle breeze became gusty, swirling snow in small cyclones around their feet. The temperature seemed to drop perceptibly, making her grateful for the extra jackets she'd insisted everyone wear. "We should head back," she announced, checking her watch. "Storm might be moving in." But as they gathered their belongings and prepared to descend, the mountain made its intentions clear. A sharp crack echoed across the valley, followed by that ominous rumble that had made Sarah's maternal instincts scream in warning. The avalanche began slowly, almost deceptively so. A small slide of snow breaking loose from the ridge above them, gathering momentum as it descended. Sarah's mind, sharpened by months of hypervigilance since becoming a widow, processed the danger in split seconds. "Everyone stay together," she shouted, grabbing Tyler and Chloe's hands. "Move toward those rocks." The natural shelter she spotted was perhaps 50 yards away, a formation of large boulders that might provide protection from the advancing wall of snow. Emma immediately understood the urgency, scooping up Mia and urging the twins to run. But 50 yards might as well have been 50 miles when facing the speed of an avalanche. The roar grew deafening as thousands of tons of snow and ice accelerated down the mountainside. Sarah's world narrowed to the simple mechanics of survival. Keep the children together, reach shelter, protect her babies at all costs. She could hear Emma shouting instructions to her siblings, could see Jake grab Josh's hand when his twins stumbled in the deep snow. They almost made it. The leading edge of the avalanche caught them just 10 yards from the rock formation. Sarah felt Tyler torn from her arms as the wall of snow slammed into them with the force of a freight train. The world became a chaotic tumble of white and cold and terror as she was swept forward, desperately reaching for her children in the churning mass. Her last coherent thought before the snow closed over her head was a prayer to David. "Help me save them. Don't let them die alone." When consciousness returned, Sarah found herself in absolute darkness, entombed in a pocket of air that couldn't have been more than 3 feet in any direction. The silence was complete and terrifying. No wind, no voices, no sound except her own ragged breathing and the thundering of her heart. Panic threatened to overwhelm her as she reached out with trembling hands, feeling the walls of her snow prison. The air was already growing stale, and she knew from half-remembered survival shows that she had limited time before carbon dioxide poisoning became a factor. But her panic wasn't for herself. It was for 6 children who might be buried somewhere, in the darkness, fighting for breath, calling for their mother. "Emma," she screamed, her voice muffled by the snow walls. "Kids, can you hear me?" Nothing. The silence that followed was the most terrifying sound Sarah had ever experienced. She forced herself to think systematically, drawing on every parenting instinct that had been honed by 18 months of solo decision-making. First priority, expand her air pocket. She began carefully scraping at the snow above her head, packing it down around her feet to create more breathing room. The snow was packed hard, compressed by the avalanche's force, but she managed to gain a few precious inches. Second priority, find her children. She called their names one by one, pausing between each to listen for any response. "Emma, Jake, Josh, Mia, Chloe, Tyler." Her voice grew hoarse from shouting, but she couldn't stop. Somewhere in this frozen tomb, 6 scared children needed to hear their mother's voice. After what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, she heard it, a faint tapping sound, rhythmic and deliberate. Someone else was alive and trying to communicate. "I can hear you," Sarah shouted toward the sound. "Keep tapping, I'm here." The tapping continued, and Sarah began digging in that direction, her fingers raw from clawing at the packed snow. Progress was agonizingly slow, but gradually she managed to create a small tunnel toward the sound. Her lungs burned from the exertion and the thinning air, but she didn't dare stop. When her fingers finally broke through into another air pocket, she felt a small hand grab hers. "Mommy!" Chloe's voice was barely a whisper, but it was the most beautiful sound Sarah had ever heard. "I'm here, baby. Are you hurt? I can't move my leg and it's so dark. Where are Emma and the boys?" Sarah's heart clenched at the fear in her 6-year-old's voice, but she kept her own voice steady. "We're going to find them. Can you wiggle through this hole for me?" What followed was a careful extraction process, with Sarah guiding Chloe through the narrow tunnel she'd created. The little girl's leg wasn't broken, but badly bruised from her tumble in the avalanche. Sarah pulled her daughter close, sharing her body heat in the cramped space they now occupied together. "I'm scared, Mummy," Chloe whispered against Sarah's neck. "I know, sweetheart, but we're going to be okay. We're going to find your brothers and sisters, and then we're going home." Sarah hoped she sounded more confident than she felt. The reality of their situation was becoming clear. They were buried under an unknown amount of snow, with limited air, no food or water, and no way to signal for help. Even if rescue teams were already searching, avalanche victims were notoriously difficult to locate without specialized equipment, but she was alive, and Chloe was alive, which meant the others might be too. That hope, however fragile, was enough to keep her moving. "Chloe, I need you to listen very carefully," Sarah said, positioning her daughter in the most comfortable spot in their small space. "We're going to play a game. I'm going to dig toward where I think the others might be, and you're going to listen for any sounds, tapping, voices, anything. If you hear something, you tell me right away. Can you do that?" Chloe nodded against her shoulder, and Sarah began the slow, methodical process of expanding their shelter and searching for her other children. She dug in the direction where logic suggested the family might have been scattered, calling names and listening for responses. The work was exhausting. The compact snow required tremendous effort to move, and the thin air left her gasping after each burst of activity. Her hands were numb from cold, and she could feel frostbite beginning to set in on her fingertips. But every few minutes she would pause and call out, hoping to hear an answering voice. After what she estimated was an hour of digging, she heard it, Emma's voice, faint but unmistakable, calling back to her. "Mom? Mom, we're here! We're all here!" The relief that flooded through Sarah was so intense she nearly collapsed. "Where are you? Can you dig into my voice?" "We're trying. Tyler's hurt and Josh is stuck, but we're all breathing." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Sarah renewed her digging efforts with desperate energy, following the sound of Emma's voice. Behind her, Chloe had become her assistant, passing back handfuls of snow and keeping up a steady stream of encouraging chatter to let the others know they were coming. The breakthrough came suddenly. Sarah's hand punched through into a much larger air pocket, and she found herself looking into Emma's frightened but determined face. The teenager had managed to create a shelter for all 5 of her siblings, using her backpack and jacket to reinforce weak spots in their snow cave. "Thank God," Sarah breathed, immediately beginning to widen the opening. "Is everyone really okay?" "Tyler hit his head, and he's been sleeping a lot," Emma reported, her voice shaky but controlled. "Josh's arm might be broken, and Mia lost her. Glasses, but we're all here. I kept them calm, like you taught me." As Sarah squeezed through into the larger space, she felt a surge of pride in her eldest daughter. At 14, Emma had taken charge of 5 younger siblings in the most terrifying situation imaginable and kept them alive. The girl she'd worried was too young for such responsibility had proven herself when it mattered most. The reunion was tearful but brief. Tyler was indeed showing signs of a concussion, slipping in and out of consciousness in a way that terrified Sarah. Josh cradled his left arm protectively, and the swelling suggested Emma's diagnosis was correct. Mia squinted in the darkness, trying to hide her panic about her lost glasses, while Jake stayed close to his twin, appointed himself Josh's protector. Their combined air pocket was larger than Sarah's original shelter. But with 7 people breathing, it wouldn't last long. She could already feel the air becoming thick and stale. They needed to either dig out or create ventilation, and with several injured children, their options were severely limited. "Listen to me, everyone," Sarah said, gathering her children around her in the cramped space. "We're going to get out of here, but we need to work together. Emma, you're in charge of keeping Tyler awake and alert. Jake, you help me dig. Everyone else, you stay warm and quiet to conserve oxygen." As they began their desperate attempt to tunnel toward the surface, Sarah couldn't help but think about the irony of their situation. She had brought her children to the mountains to heal from their father's death, to prove they could face anything as a family. Now they were literally buried alive, fighting for survival in a frozen tomb. But they were together, and they were alive. As long as those two facts remained true, Sarah refused to give up hope. Somewhere above them, she had to believe help was coming. The question was whether they could hold on long enough to be found. The first night buried beneath the avalanche was the longest of Sarah Mitchell's life. What started as a race against time to dig upward had quickly become a grim battle for basic survival. As reality set in, they weren't just temporarily trapped, they were completely entombed with no clear path to freedom. The temperature inside, their snow cave plummeted as darkness fell above ground. Sarah felt it seeping through the walls, a bone-deep cold that threatened to steal what little warmth remained in their huddled bodies. She arranged her children in the center of their small space, using her own body as a barrier against the coldest wall, while Emma mirrored her position on the opposite side. Tyler's condition had worsened throughout the evening. The 4-year-old drifted in and out of consciousness, his small body limp against Sarah's chest. Each time he slipped away, she would gently shake him, calling his name until his eyes fluttered open again. The head injury from the avalanche was clearly more serious than she'd initially hoped, and without medical attention, she feared the worst. "Mommy, my tummy hurts," Chloe whispered around midnight, her 6-year-old body shivering uncontrollably despite being sandwiched between Jake and Mia for warmth. "I know, sweetheart, we're all hungry." Sarah's own stomach had been cramping for hours. None of them had eaten since their early breakfast at the cabin, and their bodies were burning through calories, rapidly trying to maintain core temperature in the frigid environment. Josh hadn't spoken much since their reunion, cradling his injured arm and breathing in short, pained gasps. Sarah suspected internal injuries beyond the obvious broken bones. The way he hunched protectively over his left side suggested possible rib damage. In the darkness, she couldn't properly assess his condition, leaving her to imagine the worst case. Scenarios that plagued every parent's nightmares. "How much air do we have left?" Emma asked quietly, her mature understanding of their situation both a blessing and a curse. At 14, she grasped the gravity of their predicament in ways the younger children couldn't. Sarah had been monitoring their oxygen situation constantly, feeling the air grow thicker and more stagnant with each passing hour. Their combined breathing in the enclosed space was rapidly depleting their supply, and the ventilation hole they'd managed to dig had either collapsed or was insufficient for 7 people. "We need to take turns staying awake," Sarah decided. 2 people at a time in shifts. If the air gets too bad, we'll know right away and can try to dig another ventilation shaft. What she didn't voice was her growing fear that they were too deep for any shaft to reach the surface. The avalanche had carried them far from their original position, possibly burying them under 20 or 30 feet of compacted snow. Without proper tools, digging that distance was impossible. As the night wore on, their situation deteriorated rapidly. Mia, normally the family bookworm who could discuss complex topics for hours, had grown increasingly disoriented without her glasses. The 9-year-old kept asking the same questions repeatedly, her normally sharp mind struggling with the stress and oxygen deprivation. "Where are we again?" she asked, for the 5th time in an hour. "Why is it so dark?" "We're in a snow cave, remember?" Jake answered patiently, though Sarah could hear the strain in his 12-year-old voice. "We got caught in an avalanche, but Mom's going to get us out." Jake had appointed himself the family's optimist, determinedly cheerful even as their circumstances grew more dire. But Sarah noticed how his voice had grown weaker throughout the night, how he'd stopped offering to help with the digging attempts. The altitude, combined with their deteriorating air quality, was affecting them all. The twins had always been inseparable, but now Josh's injuries created a painful division between them. Jake hovered anxiously over his brother, trying to offer comfort, while Josh struggled to hide his pain. The dynamic shifted their entire family balance, leaving the healthy twin feeling helpless and guilty. "I should have grabbed him when the snow hit," Jake confessed to Sarah during one of their whispered conversations. "I was right next to him, but I was too scared to think." "You couldn't have prevented this," Sarah assured him, though she understood. His guilt. She carried the same burden tenfold, the weight of every decision that had led them to this moment. The choice to take the hike, the timing of their departure, the route they'd selected. Every parent's worst fear was failing to protect their children, and here she was, helpless to save them from slowly suffocating in a frozen tomb. By the second day, dehydration became their most immediate concern. Their saliva had grown thick and sticky, their lips cracked and bleeding from the dry, cold air. Sarah had tried melting small amounts of snow against her body for drinking water, but the process used precious calories and provided minimal hydration. Tyler's fever had spiked. During the early morning hours, his small body burning hot against Sarah's chest, while his breathing grew rapid and shallow. The head injury was clearly causing brain swelling, and without medical intervention, she knew she might lose him. The thought was unbearable. To survive David's sudden death, only to watch their youngest child slip away in her arms. "Is Tyler going to be okay?" Chloe asked, her intuitive 6-year-old understanding picking up on the gravity of her baby brother's condition. "He's fighting very hard," Sarah replied, which was both true and the only answer she could manage. "We all need to fight very hard right now." Emma had taken over most of Tyler's care, using techniques she'd learned in a babysitting safety course to monitor his breathing and keep him responsive. Sarah marveled at her eldest daughter's composure, even as she worried about the burden of responsibility Emma was shouldering. At 14, she should be concerned with schoolwork and friends, not managing a medical crisis in a survival situation. Their third day brought new horrors. The cold had penetrated so deeply that Sarah could no longer feel her toes, and she suspected frostbite was setting in. Worse, she'd noticed that Mia had stopped shivering, a dangerous sign that the 9-year-old's body was no longer able to generate heat effectively. "I'm not cold anymore, Mom," Mia announced with drowsy satisfaction. "I feel warm and sleepy." Sarah's blood ran cold at these words. Hypothermia's final stage created a false sense of warmth before the body shut down completely. She immediately began vigorous exercises with Mia, forcing the girl to move her arms and legs despite her protests, trying to restart her circulation before it was too late. "I want to sleep," Mia whined, her normally articulate speech becoming slurred. "Just let me sleep." "No sleeping right now," Sarah insisted, her voice sharper than she intended. "We're going to tell stories and sing songs. Emma, help me keep her awake." The effort to prevent Mia from slipping into hypothermic unconsciousness exhausted their already depleted energy reserves. Sarah and Emma took turns keeping the 9-year-old moving, talking, engaged, while the rest of the family watched with growing fear. If they were losing Mia to the cold, how long before the same fate claimed them all? Josh's condition had also worsened significantly. The 12-year-old's breathing had become labored, and Sarah suspected internal bleeding or possibly a punctured lung. His face had taken on a grayish pallor that was visible even in their dim environment, and he'd stopped eating the small amounts of snow they'd managed to melt for sustenance. "It hurts to breathe," he admitted to Jake during one of their whispered, twin conversations. like something stabbing me inside. Jake's distress at his brother's suffering was heartbreaking to witness. The healthy twin had grown increasingly agitated, pacing their small space and repeatedly asking Sarah what they could do to help Josh. The answer, nothing without proper medical care, was too devastating to voice. Their air quality had deteriorated, to the point where everyone felt constantly lightheaded. Simple tasks like adjusting positions or checking on each other left them gasping and exhausted. Sarah realized they were slowly suffocating, their oxygen being replaced by carbon dioxide with each breath. She made the difficult decision to attempt another digging operation, despite their weakened state. Working in 20-minute shifts to conserve energy, she and Emma took turns clawing at the snow above them, hoping to reach fresh air before their strength gave out entirely. The digging revealed the true scope of their predicament. Above their small cave lay what seemed like an endless wall of compacted snow and ice, compressed by the avalanche's force into something nearly as hard as concrete. Their fingernails had broken and bled from scraping against the unyielding surface, and after hours of effort, they'd managed to extend their tunnel only a few feet. "How deep do you think we are?" Emma asked during one of their rest periods, her voice barely above a whisper to conserve energy. Sarah had been dreading this question, knowing that honesty might destroy what little hope remained. But Emma deserved the truth. She'd proven herself, capable of handling adult responsibilities. "I think we're very deep," Sarah admitted. "Maybe deeper than we can dig without proper tools." The silence that followed was deafening. Even the younger children seemed to understand the implications of this admission. They weren't going to dig their way out. Their survival now depended entirely on rescue from above, and with each passing hour, the likelihood of being found alive diminished. Tyler's breathing had become so shallow that Sarah had to place her ear against his chest to confirm he was still alive. The fever consumed his small body, and she'd used every technique she knew to bring his temperature down. Cold snow applied to his forehead, removing layers of clothing to prevent overheating, keeping him hydrated with tiny amounts of melted snow. Nothing seemed to help. If anything, he was slipping further away from them with each passing hour. "Daddy," Tyler mumbled in his delirium, the first word he'd spoken in over a day. "Daddy's coming to get me." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. In his fevered state, Tyler was calling for David, perhaps seeing his deceased father in whatever visions filled his injured mind. The idea that her youngest might be preparing to join his father in death was more than Sarah could bear. "Daddy's not here, baby," she whispered, tears freezing on her cheeks. "But Mommy's here, and I'm not letting you go anywhere." Their fourth day brought the cruelest challenge yet, the sound of aircraft overhead. The distant rumble of helicopter rotors penetrated their snow tomb, filling the family with desperate hope that rescue had finally arrived. They screamed themselves hoarse, pounding on the walls of their cave, trying to create any sound that might penetrate to the surface. But the helicopters passed by, their search patterns apparently focused on other areas of the avalanche zone. The sound faded into the distance, leaving the Mitchell family in the devastating silence of being so close to salvation, yet utterly unreachable. "They were right there," Jake sobbed, his 12-year-old composure finally cracking completely. "Why couldn't they hear us?" Emma gathered her younger brother against her, but Sarah could see that even her eldest daughter's remarkable strength was beginning to fail. The near miss with rescue had broken something in all of them, the last vestiges of hope that they might be found in time. As their fourth night fell, Sarah faced the possibility that she might have to watch her children die one by one in this frozen tomb. Tyler was already so close to death that each breath might be his last. Mia drifted in and out of hypothermic stupor despite their constant efforts to keep her alert. Josh's internal injuries were clearly worsening, and even the healthier children showed signs of severe dehydration and exposure. The widow who had brought her family to the mountains seeking healing had instead led them into a trap from which there seemed no escape. As she held her dying youngest child and listened to the labored breathing of her other 5 children, Sarah Mitchell faced the darkest moment of her life. The very real possibility that her family's story would end here, in the cold and darkness, forgotten beneath the snow. The psychological toll of their entrapment manifested differently in each child. Jake, once the family comedian who could lighten any mood with his jokes and impressions, had withdrawn into himself. The normally talkative 12-year-old sat hunched against the far wall, staring into the darkness with hollow eyes. His protective instincts toward Josh warred with his own terror, creating an internal conflict that left him paralyzed with indecision. Chloe, at 6 years old, oscillated between periods of surprising maturity and episodes of regression that broke Sarah's heart. One moment she would be comforting Mia with gentle words and sharing her small portion of melted snow. The next she would be crying for her father, asking when Daddy was coming to take them home. The little girl had started having accidents, her potty training forgotten under the stress of their situation. "I want my room," Chloe whimpered during a particularly difficult night. "I want my pink sheets and my stuffed elephant. Why can't we go home now?" Sarah struggled to find age-appropriate explanations for their predicament without destroying what innocence remained in her 6-year-old's worldview. How do you explain to a child that sometimes bad things happen for no reason, that mountains can swallow families whole, that rescue might never come? Mia's intellectual nature, usually her greatest strength, had become a liability in their survival situation. Without her glasses, the 9-year-old felt completely disoriented, and her analytical mind couldn't process their reality without visual confirmation. She'd begun creating elaborate fantasy scenarios to cope with their circumstances. "We're not really buried," she announced confidently during their 5th day. "This is just a really realistic dream. When I wake up, we'll be back at the cabin making hot chocolate." Emma tried gently correcting these delusions, but Sarah eventually realized that Mia's mental escape might be a necessary coping mechanism. The alternative, forcing a 9-year-old to confront the reality of their likely death, seemed unnecessarily cruel. Josh's deterioration accelerated alarmingly as their imprisonment stretched on. The 12-year-old had developed a rattling cough that kept the entire family awake during their rest periods. Pink foam appeared at the corners of his mouth, a sign that Sarah recognized with growing horror as possible internal bleeding affecting his lungs. "Don't tell Jake," Josh whispered to his mother during one of their private moments. "He already feels bad enough. I don't want him to know how scared I am." The maturity in her injured son's voice reminded Sarah painfully of David. Josh had inherited his father's protective instincts, his desire to shield others from worry, even at his own expense. At 12 years old, he was already trying to manage his twin brother's emotional welfare while battling for his own life. Their food situation had become critical by the 6th day. The small amount of snow they'd been able to melt provided minimal calories, and their bodies were beginning to consume muscle tissue for energy. Sarah could feel her own strength ebbing, her decision-making ability compromised by hunger and exhaustion. She'd started rationing her own portions to ensure the children received what little sustenance was available, but even this sacrifice felt inadequate. Watching Tyler's small face grow more gaunt with each passing hour, seeing Chloe's ribs become visible beneath her clothes, filled Sarah with a helpless rage at her inability to provide for her children. The mother who had prided herself on always having snacks in her purse, who had never let her children go to bed hungry, now faced the devastating reality of watching them slowly starve. Her practical, organized approach to single parenthood meant nothing here, where survival came down to factors completely beyond her control. Sleep had become their enemy. In their weakened state, the children would slip into unconsciousness for hours at a time, and Sarah lived in constant terror that one of them simply wouldn't wake up. She'd taken to checking breathing and pulses obsessively, her medical knowledge limited but sufficient to recognize the signs of impending organ failure. Tyler's fever had reached dangerous levels, his small body so hot that Sarah could feel the heat radiating through their shared clothing. Yet paradoxically, his extremities were ice cold, suggesting that his circulation was beginning to fail. The head injury had progressed beyond anything she could treat with their non-existent resources. During lucid moments, Tyler would ask for water in a voice so weak it was barely audible. Sarah would carefully place drops of melted snow on his cracked lips, knowing it wasn't nearly enough, but unable to provide more. The sight of her youngest child essentially dying of thirst while surrounded by frozen water felt like cosmic cruelty. Sing. The butterfly song, "Mommy," Tyler requested during one of his rare alert periods. It was a lullaby Sarah had created when he was a baby, complete with hand gestures and silly voices that had never failed to make him giggle. Sarah's voice cracked as she began the familiar melody, the words taking on new meaning in their current circumstances. The butterfly in the song found its way home through dark forests and over tall mountains, guided by love and determination. She hoped desperately that her baby could find his way back to them through whatever darkness clouded his injured mind. Emma had become Sarah's unofficial medical assistant, helping monitor vital signs and assess changes in her siblings' conditions. The 14-year-old's maturity astounded Sarah daily, but she worried about the psychological cost of forcing a teenager to confront such adult responsibilities. "Mum, I think Josh stopped breathing for a few seconds," Emma reported during their 7th night, her voice carefully controlled to avoid alarming the other children. Sarah immediately moved to her injured son's side, placing her ear against his chest to listen for heartbeat and respiratory sounds. The irregular rhythm she detected filled her with fresh dread. Josh's body was beginning to shut down, his damaged organs unable to maintain basic life functions. She began gentle chest compressions, not full CPR, but enough stimulation to encourage his heart to maintain a steady rhythm. Josh's eyes fluttered open, confused and frightened but alive. The close call reminded Sarah that they were balanced on a knife's edge between survival and death, with no margin for error. The sound of wind above them had become a constant companion, sometimes gentle, sometimes howling with fury that penetrated, even their insulated snow cave. During quieter moments, Sarah strained to hear any indication of human activity, voices calling, equipment operating, anything that might suggest rescue operations were still active, but the mountain remained silent, except for the natural sounds of weather and wildlife. The helicopters that had passed overhead days earlier hadn't returned, and Sarah began to suspect that official search efforts had been called off. After a certain point, Avalanche rescues shifted from life-saving operations to body recovery missions. The thought that searchers might have given up on finding survivors filled Sarah with desperate fury. They were still alive, still fighting, still hoping for rescue. How could the outside world simply write them off as casualties when she could feel her children's hearts beating against her in the darkness? "Maybe we should try digging again," Jake suggested weakly during their 8th day. "I feel stronger today." But even Jake's eternal optimism couldn't disguise the reality that none of them had the strength for serious physical exertion. Their previous digging attempts had exhausted their energy reserves and yielded minimal progress. Without proper tools or adequate nutrition, they couldn't excavate their way through the massive amount of snow separating them from the surface. Sarah had begun making peace with the possibility that they wouldn't survive long enough for rescue. Her thoughts turned to final conversations with each child, to messages she wanted them to carry forward if somehow they made it out without her. The practical mother, who had always focused on solutions, found herself contemplating legacy and last words. "I want you all to know how proud I am of each of you," she told her children during what might have been their final night together. "You've been braver than any adults I know. Your father would be amazed by your courage and strength." Emma understood the gravity behind these words, tears streaming down her face as she helped Sarah arrange the younger children for what comfort was possible. They all sensed that their situation had moved beyond hope, that survival was no longer a matter of holding on until rescue arrived. Tyler's breathing had become so shallow that Sarah had to place her hand on his chest to detect movement. His fever had broken, but rather than relief, this brought new terror. The sudden absence of fever often preceded death in cases of severe head trauma. His small body was giving up the fight, conserving energy for essential organ function. Mia had slipped into a state that resembled sleep, but felt more ominous. Her breathing was regular, but she wouldn't respond to voices or gentle shaking. The hypothermia that Sarah had been fighting for days was finally claiming victory, shutting down her 9-year-old's consciousness as her body temperature dropped to dangerous levels. Josh's coughing had worsened, each spasm bringing up more blood and leaving him gasping for breath. The internal injuries that Sarah had hoped might heal on their own were clearly beyond his body's ability to repair. His twin brother held his hand constantly now, whispering reassurances and shared memories from their short but intense life. Together, even Chloe, the most resilient of the children in many ways, had grown quiet and still. Her 6-year-old body simply didn't have the resources to fight cold, hunger, and thirst for so many days. She lay curled against Sarah's side, occasionally asking for water, but otherwise conserving her energy for the basic task of breathing. Their 9th day dawned somewhere above them. Sarah Mitchell faced the ultimate parental nightmare, watching her children slip away one by one while being powerless to save them. The woman who had survived her husband's sudden death, who had rebuilt her life around protecting and nurturing 6 young lives, was about to lose everything that gave her existence meaning. The mountain that had promised healing and fresh starts had become their tomb, a frozen monument to her failure as a mother and protector. In the growing silence of their snow cave, broken only by increasingly labored breathing, Sarah prepared to join her children in whatever came next, holding them close as they faced the darkness together. Marcus Thompson had been tracking the storm system for 3 days when his instincts told him something was wrong on Mount Harrison's eastern slope. As a 28-year-old professional mountaineer and search and rescue specialist with the Colorado Mountain Rescue Association, Marcus possessed an almost supernatural ability to read mountain conditions. His colleagues joked that he could smell avalanche danger from miles away, but on this particular morning it wasn't danger he sensed, it was opportunity. The storm had finally cleared after days of heavy snowfall, and the brilliant sunshine created perfect conditions for aerial reconnaissance. Most of the official search teams had scaled back their operations after a week of fruitless searching for the Mitchell family. The statistical reality was harsh. After 7 days buried in an avalanche, the likelihood of finding survivors dropped to virtually zero. Resources were being redirected to body recovery rather than active rescue. But Marcus Thompson didn't operate by statistics. He operated by gut instinct, honed through 15 years of mountain experience, starting as a teenage rock climber in the Rockies and evolving into one of Colorado's most respected rescue specialists. He'd pulled survivors from impossible situations before, and something about the Mitchell case nagged at him in ways he couldn't explain. The helicopter pilot, Janet Rodriguez, was one of the few willing to continue search flights when other agencies had moved on. A former military aviator with 2 tours in Afghanistan, Janet understood the importance of never leaving people behind. She and Marcus had worked together on dozens of rescues, developing an almost telepathic communication that made them one of the most effective search teams in the region. "Weather's perfect today," Janet noted as they lifted off from the base station at dawn. "Visibility unlimited, minimal wind. If there's anything to find up there, today's our best shot." Marcus studied the topographical map spread across his lap, marking areas where previous search efforts had been concentrated. The official search pattern had focused on the most likely zones based on avalanche flow dynamics and terrain analysis. But families caught in natural disasters rarely behaved predictably, especially when survival instincts kicked in. "Take us to grid section 7, Marcus instructed, pointing to an area that had received minimal attention from other search teams. "I want to check the secondary debris field from a different angle." Janet banked the helicopter toward the eastern slope, and Marcus pressed his face against the window, scanning the pristine white landscape below. To untrained eyes, the avalanche zone looked like a smooth, undisturbed snowfield. But Marcus could read the subtle signs, the way light reflected differently off areas of varying snow density, the barely visible ridges that indicated debris flow patterns, the slight depressions that might mark where the avalanche had deposited its heaviest cargo. They'd been searching for 40 minutes when Marcus spotted it, an almost imperceptible discoloration in the snow, barely darker than the surrounding white, but consistent with the organic matter that avalanches often picked up during their descent. Tree branches, soil, and sometimes fabric from victims' clothing could create these subtle color variations. "Janet, bring us down to 200 feet. I want a closer look at that area near the rock outcropping." As they descended, Marcus pulled out his high-powered binoculars and began systematically scanning the suspicious area. The discoloration was more pronounced from this angle, and he could make out what appeared to be debris scattered in a rough line consistent with avalanche deposition patterns. "There," he said suddenly, his voice tight with excitement. 11 o'clock, about 50 yards from that large boulder. Do you see that blue object partially buried in the snow?" Janet maneuvered the helicopter for a better angle, and both rescuers focused on the small splash of color that stood out against the monochromatic landscape. Through the binoculars, Marcus could make out the corner of what appeared to be a backpack, the bright blue fabric partially exposed by wind erosion. "That's not natural," Janet confirmed, "and it matches the description of the gear the Mitchell family was carrying." Marcus felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that accompanied potential breakthrough moments in rescue operations. After days of searching with no results, this small patch of blue represented the first tangible evidence that they were looking in the right area. "Set us down as close as you can," Marcus ordered, already checking his rescue equipment. "And radio base camp, tell them we've got a possible contact in grid 7. The helicopter touched down on a relatively flat area about 100 yards from the suspicious debris. Marcus jumped out before the rotors stopped spinning, his boots sinking deep into the soft snow as he raced toward the blue object. Janet remained with the aircraft but kept the engine running, ready for immediate departure if they found survivors. Up close, Marcus's suspicions were confirmed. The blue fabric belonged to a child-sized backpack, and scattered around it were other items clearly belonging to the Mitchell family. A woman's glove, a plastic water bottle, and most significantly, a small pink hat that matched the description of clothing worn by one of the younger children. But these surface items were just markers. If the family had been caught in the avalanche in this area, their bodies would be buried much deeper, possibly 15 to 20 feet below the current snow level. Marcus pulled out his avalanche probe, a collapsible metal rod designed to locate buried victims, and began systematically probing the snow around the debris field. The technique required patience and methodical coverage. Marcus worked in a grid pattern, inserting the probe every 18 inches and feeling for the resistance that would indicate something solid beneath the snow. For the first hour, he found nothing but the occasional rock or piece of wood picked up by the avalanche. Then, at a depth of approximately 12 feet, his probe struck something that felt distinctly different. Not the solid resistance of rock or the springy give of buried vegetation, but something with the density and texture of human remains. Marcus's heart rate spiked as he marked the spot and began probing the surrounding area. Within minutes, he'd located what appeared to be multiple objects at similar depths, spread across an area roughly 15 feet in diameter. The pattern was consistent with a group of people who had been tumbled together during an avalanche and deposited in a cluster. "Janet!" Marcus called the helicopter pilot. "I've got multiple contacts. We need the full rescue team up here immediately." Janet was already on the radio, calling for emergency backup and medical support. The nearest rescue team was 30 minutes away by helicopter, but every minute counted if there was any chance the victims were still alive. After 9 days buried in snow, survival would be nothing short of miraculous. But Marcus had seen miracles. Before in the mountains, he began digging immediately, using a lightweight shovel to carefully excavate the area around his probe contacts. The snow was compacted hard from the avalanche's pressure, requiring significant effort to break through. But Marcus was in peak physical condition from years of mountain rescue work, and desperation gave him additional strength. 18 inches. Down, his shovel struck fabric. Marcus dropped to his knees and began digging with his hands, carefully exposing what appeared to be a woman's jacket. The fabric was intact, and more importantly, he could feel body warmth beneath the layers of snow, faint but unmistakably present. "I've got a live one!" Marcus shouted to Janet, who immediately began coordinating with incoming rescue teams. "Female adult showing signs of life!" Working with the precision that years of training had ingrained, Marcus began the delicate process of excavating around the victim without causing further injury. The woman was positioned protectively over what appeared to be a small child. Her body curved in a way that suggested she'd been shielding someone during the avalanche's final moments. As Marcus cleared snow from around the woman's head, he was amazed to discover that she was conscious, her eyes open and alert despite her ordeal. When she saw him, tears began streaming down her face, and she tried to speak through lips cracked and swollen from exposure. "My children," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Please, my children." "Ma'am, I'm Marcus Thompson with Mountain Rescue. We're going to get you out of here," Marcus assured her, continuing to dig around her position. "How many children are with you?" "6, Sarah managed to say. "All 6 of my children. Are they alive?" Marcus's amazement grew as he realized the full scope of what he'd discovered. 7 people had survived 9 days buried in an avalanche, a feat that defied every statistical probability he'd ever learned about mountain rescue. He immediately began expanding his excavation area, looking for the children Sarah had mentioned. The first child he located was a teenage girl, positioned slightly away from her mother, but still within the protective cluster. Like her mother, the girl was conscious and responsive, though clearly suffering from severe exposure and dehydration. "Emma," Sarah called weakly when she saw Marcus working to free her eldest daughter. "Is Emma okay?" "She's alive," Marcus confirmed, noting the girl's steady breathing and alert eyes. "We're going to get all of you out." As Marcus continued digging, the true miracle of their survival became apparent. The family had been deposited in a natural air pocket created by the rock outcropping above them. The avalanche had packed snow around them in a way that created insulation while maintaining just enough ventilation to prevent suffocation. It was a combination of circumstances so unlikely that Marcus struggled to believe what he was seeing. The sound of approaching helicopters filled the air as additional rescue teams arrived at the scene. Marcus directed the incoming personnel to begin systematic excavation of the remaining children, while he focused on assessing the medical condition of the family members already exposed. Sarah Mitchell was suffering from severe hypothermia, dehydration, and what appeared to be frostbite on her extremities. But she was alert and responsive, her vital signs stable considering her ordeal. Emma showed similar symptoms, but seemed slightly stronger, possibly due to her age and physical resilience. "How long have you been buried?" Marcus asked Sarah, as paramedics began establishing intravenous lines to address her dehydration. 9 days, Sarah replied, her voice growing stronger as warm fluids began entering her system. "We tried to dig out, but we were too deep. I thought we were going to die down there." The rescue operation quickly expanded into a major medical emergency as additional children were located and excavated. Each discovery brought fresh amazement from the rescue team. 6-year-old Chloe, unconscious but breathing. 12-year-old. Twins, Jake and Josh, with Josh showing signs of serious internal injuries. 9-year-old Mia, responsive but disoriented. And finally, 4-year-old Tyler, barely clinging to life but definitely alive. Dr. Patricia Valdez, the emergency physician who had arrived with the second helicopter, began triaging the family members as they were freed from their snow tomb. The medical challenges were staggering. Multiple cases of severe hypothermia, dehydration, malnutrition, and various trauma injuries from the initial avalanche impact. "This is unprecedented," Dr. Valdez told Marcus as they worked to stabilize the family for transport. 9 days buried in snow, and all 7 survived. "I've never seen anything like it." Tyler, the youngest, required immediate intensive care. His head injury had progressed to a critical stage, and his vital signs were dangerously unstable. Dr. Valdez made the decision to helicopter him directly to Denver's Children's Hospital, where pediatric neurosurgeons were standing by. Josh, also, required emergency transport due to internal injuries that had worsened during their entrapment. His twin brother Jake refused to be separated from him, clinging to Josh's hand as paramedics prepared him for helicopter evacuation. "I'm not leaving him," Jake insisted with 12-year-old determination. "We stay together." Sarah, despite her own medical needs, focused entirely on ensuring her children received appropriate care. She provided medical histories, described symptoms she'd observed during their entrapment, and made crucial decisions about treatment priorities. Even after 9 days of unimaginable suffering, her maternal instincts remained sharp and focused. "Emma's been having episodes where she seems confused," Sarah told Dr. Valdez, "and Mia hasn't been able to regulate her body temperature. Tyler's had a fever for days, and Josh has been coughing up blood." This information proved invaluable as medical teams prepared treatment plans for each child. Sarah's careful observation during their entrapment had provided a detailed medical timeline that would help doctors address complications that might otherwise have been missed. As the rescue operation continued, Marcus found himself in awe of what this family had accomplished. Not only had they survived impossible conditions, but they'd maintained their unity and mutual support throughout the ordeal. The love and protection they'd shown each other had undoubtedly contributed to their survival against all odds. The final phase of the rescue involved transporting the family members to various medical facilities based on their needs. Tyler and Josh were airlifted to specialized trauma centers, while the other children went to regional hospitals for evaluation and treatment. Sarah insisted on being transported last, ensuring all her children were safely evacuated before accepting medical care for herself. "Ma'am, you need immediate treatment too," Marcus told her as she watched the last helicopter carrying her children disappear over the ridge. "You've done everything you could for them. Now let us take care of you." Sarah nodded, finally allowing exhaustion to claim her as paramedics prepared her for transport. As consciousness faded, her last words were a whispered prayer of gratitude. "Thank you for finding us. Thank you for bringing my babies home." Marcus Thompson stood in the snow-covered debris field, surrounded by the equipment and aftermath of the most remarkable rescue of his career. 7 people had been pulled alive from what should have been their tomb, defying every statistic and probability in mountain rescue literature. As he packed his gear and prepared for his own helicopter ride back to base camp, Marcus reflected on the factors that had made this miracle possible. The family's unity and mutual protection, the fortunate positioning in a natural air pocket, the persistent weather patterns that had prevented further avalanches in the area, and perhaps most importantly, the mother's unwavering determination to keep her children alive against impossible odds. But there was another factor Marcus couldn't ignore: the inexplicable instinct that had drawn him to this particular search area when everyone else had given up. Some rescuers called it luck, others called it experience. Marcus preferred to think of it as the mountain's way of giving back, of balancing the scales after taking so much. The Mitchell family's ordeal was far from over. Recovery would take months, and some of the children faced serious medical challenges. But they were alive. They were together, and they had a chance at healing that no one had thought possible just hours before. As Marcus's helicopter lifted off from the rescue site, he took one last look at the area where 7 lives had been saved. The snow had already begun filling in the excavation holes, erasing the physical evidence of their miraculous rescue. But the story would live on, a testament to the power of love, determination, and the occasional miracle that makes mountain rescue work worthwhile. The sterile brightness of Denver General Hospital's intensive care unit felt like an alien world. After 9 days in absolute darkness, Sarah Mitchell awakened to the sound of monitors beeping rhythmically, her body connected to tubes and wires that seemed to anchor her to life itself. The sensation of clean sheets against her skin, the warmth of heated air flowing through the room, and the simple act of opening her eyes without strain felt miraculous after their underground ordeal. Dr. Rebecca Chen, the attending physician, overseeing Sarah's care, had been briefed on the extraordinary circumstances of the family's rescue. A specialist in hypothermia and exposure trauma, Dr. Chen had treated hundreds of mountain accident victims, but never an entire family who had survived such prolonged entrapment. "Mrs. Mitchell, you're safe now," Dr. Chen said gently as Sarah's eyes focused on her surroundings. "You're at Denver General Hospital, and all of your children are alive and receiving medical care." The relief that flooded through Sarah was so intense it left her gasping. For 9 days, she had carried the crushing weight of responsibility for 6 young lives, never knowing if her decisions were helping or hastening their deaths. To hear confirmation that all her children had survived felt like emerging from a nightmare into dawn. "Tyler," Sarah whispered, her voice still hoarse from dehydration. "How is Tyler?" His head injury was so severe. Dr. Chen's expression grew more serious. "Your youngest son is in critical but stable condition at Children's Hospital. He's undergone surgery to relieve pressure on his brain from the head trauma. The pediatric neurosurgeon is cautiously optimistic, but he'll need extensive rehabilitation." The news hit Sarah with mixed emotions: gratitude that Tyler was alive, but fear for what his future might hold. Brain injuries in young children could have unpredictable long-term effects, potentially affecting everything from speech and movement to personality and cognitive function. "What about the others?" Sarah pressed, needing to account for each of her children before she could focus on her own recovery. Dr. Chen consulted her tablet, pulling up status reports from multiple hospitals across the Denver metropolitan area. Josh underwent surgery for internal bleeding and 3 broken ribs. The surgery was successful and he's recovering well. Jake refused to leave his side, so they're sharing a room at Presbyterian St. Joseph. Emma is here with us, being treated for moderate hypothermia and malnutrition, but she's stable and asking to see you." The systematic update continued as Dr. Chen described each child's condition. Mia was at Rose Medical Center undergoing vision therapy to address problems that had developed during her time without glasses in the cave. Chloe was at National Jewish Health, receiving treatment for respiratory complications from prolonged exposure to poor air quality. "The remarkable thing," Dr. Chen continued, "is that despite 9 days of extreme conditions, none of your children suffered permanent organ damage. Their survival is being studied by medical professionals across the country." Over the following days, Sarah began to understand the full scope of what their family had endured and overcome. Physical therapists worked with her daily to restore circulation to extremities affected by frostbite. Nutritionists carefully planned her refeeding process, gradually reintroducing her digestive system to normal food after days of starvation. Psychologists evaluated her mental state, watching for signs of post-traumatic stress disorder that commonly affected disaster survivors. The medical team's approach was holistic, addressing not just the immediate physical trauma, but the long-term psychological and emotional impacts of their ordeal. Sarah learned that survival was just the first step in a recovery process that could take months or even years to complete. Emma, as the oldest child, had recovered more quickly than her siblings. At 14, her body had the resilience to bounce back from the physical trauma, though the emotional toll was evident in her hypervigilance and difficulty sleeping. She stayed close to Sarah whenever possible, reluctant to be separated from the mother she'd helped keep alive. "I keep having dreams that we're back in the cave," Emma confided during one of their conversations. "I wake up thinking I can't breathe, that the walls are closing in again." Sarah recognized these symptoms as classic signs of trauma response. The cave had become more than just a physical trap. It had created psychological wounds that would require careful attention to heal properly. She made sure Emma was included in the counseling sessions that had been arranged for the entire family. The reunion with Tyler was emotionally overwhelming. The 4-year-old lay surrounded by medical equipment in the pediatric intensive care unit, his small head partially shaved and bandaged from the neurosurgery. But when he saw Sarah, his eyes lit up with recognition, and he managed a weak smile that reassured her that the essential Tyler, her curious, affectionate youngest child, was still present. "Mommy, I had bad dreams," Tyler said, in a voice barely above a whisper. "But the doctors say the dreams can't hurt me now." The medical team had explained that Tyler's recovery would be a long process. The brain injury had affected his motor coordination and speech, requiring months of intensive therapy. But his cognitive function appeared largely intact, and children's brains had remarkable capacity for adaptation and healing. Josh's recovery presented different challenges. The internal injuries had healed well, but the 12-year-old struggled with anxiety and panic attacks triggered by enclosed spaces. Hospital rooms, elevators, even closets could send him into episodes of hyperventilation and terror that transported him back to their snow tomb. "He won't even use the bathroom if the door closes completely," Jake reported to Sarah during one of her visits. "I have to stay right outside so he knows he's not trapped." The twins' bond had intensified during their ordeal, with Jake becoming almost obsessively protective of his injured brother. While this closeness had helped them survive, mental health professionals warned that it could become unhealthy if taken to extremes. Both boys would need individual therapy to develop independent coping mechanisms. Mia's vision problems had been more serious than initially realized. The prolonged period without her glasses, combined with the stress and poor lighting conditions in the cave, had caused a deterioration in her eyesight that required corrective surgery. The 9-year-old was struggling with feeling helpless and dependent, her usual intellectual confidence shaken by the experience of being unable to see. Clearly, "I couldn't help anyone," Mia told Sarah sadly. "I couldn't even see what was happening. I felt useless." Sarah worked with Mia's therapists to help her understand that survival hadn't depended on any one person's abilities, but on their collective strength and mutual support. Each family member had contributed something essential to their survival, even when they couldn't see their own value. Chloe's recovery was complicated by regression in several developmental areas. The 6-year-old had lost some of the independence she'd gained in recent years, becoming clingy and fearful of separation from Sarah. Night terrors plagued her sleep, often featuring scenarios where family members disappeared or were lost in darkness. The child psychologist working with Chloe recommended a gradual approach to rebuilding her confidence and sense of security. This involved structured play therapy, art activities that allowed her to express her fears non-verbally, and carefully planned separation exercises to help her regain trust in her own safety. As weeks passed, Sarah began to appreciate the complexity of trauma recovery. Physical healing was relatively straightforward. Bones mended, frostbite damage resolved, nutritional deficits were corrected. But psychological healing required a different kind of patience and expertise. The family attended group therapy sessions where they could discuss their shared experience and individual perspectives on what had happened. These sessions revealed surprising insights about how each family member had perceived their time in the cave differently. Emma had focused on taking care of her siblings, finding strength in responsibility even as she battled her own terror. Jake had used humor and optimism as shields against despair, maintaining hope even when circumstances seemed hopeless. Josh had withdrawn into himself, conserving emotional energy while his body fought physical trauma. Mia had created elaborate mental escape scenarios using her imagination to cope with a reality too frightening to fully accept. Chloe had regressed to earlier developmental stages as a protective mechanism, allowing others to take care of her when she couldn't care for herself. Tyler, too young to fully understand their danger, had simply trusted that his family would keep him safe. Sarah realized that each coping strategy had been both adaptive and limiting. Emma's responsibility had helped keep everyone alive, but had robbed her of the chance to be a normal teenager. Jake's optimism had buoyed everyone's spirits, but had prevented him from processing his own fear and grief. Understanding these patterns became crucial for designing effective treatment plans. The media attention surrounding their rescue created additional challenges. News outlets wanted interviews, documentary filmmakers requested access, and book publishers offered contracts. The story of a family surviving 9 days, buried in an avalanche, captured public imagination, but Sarah was protective of her children's privacy during their vulnerable recovery period. "We're not ready to talk about what happened," Sarah told reporters who called the hospital. "Right now, we're focused on healing and being grateful for our second chance." Dr. Chen supported Sarah's decision to limit media exposure, explaining that trauma survivors often needed time to process their experiences privately before they could discuss them publicly. Premature exposure to intense questioning or reliving the events could interfere with the healing process. The financial impact of their ordeal was staggering. Multiple hospitalizations, specialized treatments, ongoing therapy costs, and lost income from Sarah's inability to work created mounting pressure. The family's insurance covered basic medical costs, but many of the therapies and treatments needed for full recovery were considered experimental or elective. Community support emerged as an unexpected blessing. The town of Cascade, where they had rented the vacation cabin, organized fundraising events to help with medical expenses. Marcus Thompson, the rescuer who had found them, started a crowdfunding campaign that raised hundreds of thousands of dollars for the family's recovery costs. "People want to help," Marcus explained during one of his visits to check on the family's progress. "Your story gives them hope that miracles can happen." that families can survive anything if they stick together. Sarah was moved by the generosity of strangers who had been touched by their story. Letters and cards arrived daily from people sharing their own survival stories, offering encouragement, and expressing admiration for the family's courage and resilience. Educational opportunities arose from their experience as well. Medical schools invited Sarah to speak about family dynamics during crisis situations. Her observations about how each child had coped differently with their shared trauma provided valuable insights for pediatric emergency medicine and child psychology programs. What you learned about your children during those 9 days could help other families facing trauma, suggested Dr. Elizabeth Morrison, a child psychologist who had become involved in their care. Your insights about maintaining hope and unity under extreme conditions are remarkably valuable. As spring arrived and the family prepared to leave the hospital system, Sarah reflected on how profoundly their experience had changed them. They were no longer the same people who had hiked up Mount Harrison on that sunny February morning. The mountain had stripped away everything non-essential, revealing the core of who they were as individuals and as a family. The children had developed a maturity and resilience that would serve them throughout their lives. They had learned that they could survive unimaginable hardship, that love could overcome despair, and that family bonds could withstand any pressure. These lessons, learned in the crucible of survival, would shape their character and relationships. For decades to come, Sarah had discovered strength she never knew she possessed. The grief and uncertainty that had plagued her since David's death had been replaced by a clear understanding of her capabilities as a mother and protector. She had kept 6 children alive under impossible conditions, and that knowledge gave her confidence to face whatever future challenges awaited them. Their time in the mountain's darkness had paradoxically brought them into the light, a deeper appreciation for life, love, and the bonds that held their family together. As they prepared to begin the next phase of their journey, Sarah knew that while their bodies had healed, the true recovery was just beginning. 6 months after their rescue, the Mitchell family faced their greatest challenge yet, returning to the mountains. Dr. Morrison had recommended what she called controlled exposure therapy, a carefully planned confrontation with the environment that had nearly claimed their lives. The goal was to reclaim their relationship with nature and overcome the paralyzing fear that had developed since their rescue. "We can't let the mountain own us forever," Sarah explained to her children as they sat in their living room in Ohio, looking at photos of a therapeutic retreat center in the Colorado Rockies. "If we don't face this fear, it will control our lives." The retreat, called Mountain Hope Recovery Center, specialized in helping trauma survivors overcome environment-specific phobias. Founded by Dr. James Whitefield, a former Army psychologist who had developed PTSD after a military accident in Afghanistan, the center offered a unique approach that combined traditional therapy with gradual outdoor exposure. Emma's reaction was immediate and visceral. "No," she said firmly, her 14-year-old voice carrying an authority born from trauma. "I'm not going back there, I can't." Her response reflected the anxiety that had plagued the entire family since their rescue. Simple activities like hiking, local trails, or even walking through snow had become triggers for panic attacks. The sound of wind could send Josh into hyperventilation episodes. Chloe refused to sleep without multiple nightlights, terrified of darkness that reminded her of their underground prison. The decision to participate in the Mountain Hope program wasn't made lightly. It represented a fork in the road for the Mitchell family. They could continue living with the limitations imposed by their trauma, or they could actively work to reclaim their lives from fear. Sarah had been wrestling with her own complex relationship with the mountains. Part of her blamed herself for taking her children into danger, for choosing that particular trail on that particular day. The rational part of her mind understood that avalanches were unpredictable natural phenomena, but guilt doesn't always respond to logic. "I need to know that I can protect them," Sarah confided to Dr. Morrison during a private session. "I need to prove to myself and to them that I can make good decisions about their safety," the therapist nodded understandingly. Recovery isn't just about overcoming fear. It's about rebuilding confidence in your ability to assess and manage risk appropriately. Jake, ever the family optimist, had been the first to voice support for the mountain program. "Maybe if we go back, we can make better memories," he suggested during one of their family meetings. "Right now, when I think about mountains, all I remember is being scared and cold. Maybe we can remember something good instead." His twin brother, Josh, remained skeptical. The 12-year-old had developed severe claustrophobia since their rescue, requiring extensive therapy just to function in normal indoor spaces. The idea of voluntarily returning to an environment where he might feel trapped again terrified him. "What if something goes wrong?" Josh voiced the fear they all carried. "What if there's another avalanche, or we get lost, or the weather changes? What if we can't protect ourselves?" These were legitimate concerns that required careful planning and preparation. Dr. Whitefield and his team had developed a progressive exposure protocol specifically for avalanche survivors, beginning with indoor simulations and gradually advancing to actual mountain environments under controlled conditions. The first phase of treatment took place at the center's facility in Boulder, where they had constructed a realistic snow cave simulation using refrigeration technology and artificial snow. The family would spend time in this controlled environment, practicing relaxation techniques and gradually extending their comfort with enclosed spaces. Mia, whose vision had been restored through surgery but who still struggled with confidence issues, found the simulation particularly challenging. "I can't see the edges of the room," she complained during their first session. "It feels like the walls could close in on me." The therapeutic team worked with each family member individually, while also conducting group sessions that reinforced their collective strength. They learned advanced wilderness survival techniques, not to replace rescue services, but to build confidence in their ability to handle emergencies appropriately. "Knowledge is power over fear," explained instructor Rebecca Martinez, a former park ranger who had survived her own mountain trauma. "When you understand how avalanches work, how to read weather patterns, and how to respond to emergencies, the mountains become less mysterious and threatening." Emma surprised everyone by emerging as the most dedicated student of wilderness safety. The teenager who had initially refused to consider returning to the mountains threw herself into learning everything she could about mountain weather, avalanche safety, and emergency protocols. "If we're going to do this, we're going to do it." "Right," Emma declared during their second week at the center. "I'm not going to be helpless again." Her transformation became a catalyst for the rest of the family. Watching their eldest daughter confront her fears with such determination inspired the younger children to push through their own anxiety barriers. The second phase of treatment involved day trips to nearby foothills, carefully planned excursions that allowed the family to experience outdoor environments while maintaining easy access to shelter and support. These trips were accompanied by therapists and wilderness guides who could intervene immediately if anyone experienced overwhelming anxiety. Chloe's first panic attack on the mountainside was both heartbreaking and therapeutic. The 6-year-old became hysterical at the sight of snow beginning to fall, convinced that another avalanche was imminent. But instead of fleeing, the family surrounded her with comfort and reassurance, demonstrating that they could handle the crisis together. "We're safe, sweetheart," Sarah soothed, holding Chloe while the snowflakes fell gently around them. "This is just a light snow shower. Look around. We can see for miles in every direction. There are no steep slopes above us, no avalanche danger." The incident became a teaching moment about the difference between rational caution and paralyzing fear. Dr. Whitefield helped the family analyze the actual risk factors present in their current environment versus the triggers that had activated Chloe's trauma response. Josh's breakthrough came during their third week at the center. The boy, who had struggled with claustrophobia in hospital rooms, managed to spend 15 minutes in the artificial snow cave without panic. His success was modest by most standards, but for Josh, it represented a monumental victory over fear. "I kept thinking about how we took care of each other in the real cave," Josh explained afterward. "If we could survive that, I can handle this practice cave." Tyler's enthusiasm for the program continued to puzzle and inspire the family. The 5-year-old seemed to view their mountain training as an adventure, showing none of the anxiety that affected his siblings. His fearlessness worried Sarah initially, but Dr. Whitefield explained that Tyler's response was actually quite healthy. "He's not reckless," the psychologist assured Sarah. "He's simply not carrying the same traumatic associations as the rest of you. His resilience can actually help the family heal by providing a model of healthy engagement with the environment." The family's progress was documented extensively, both for their own reference and as part of a research study on family trauma recovery. Video recordings of their sessions showed remarkable transformations over time: rigid postures relaxing, defensive behaviors diminishing, and genuine smiles returning to faces that had been marked by strain for months. Mia's artistic talents emerged as a powerful therapeutic tool. The 9-year-old began creating detailed drawings of their mountain experiences, both the traumatic memories and the new positive associations they were building. Her artwork became a visual timeline of their healing journey. "Drawing helps me see the difference between what really happened and what I was afraid might happen," Mia explained to her therapist. "When I draw the real cave, it's dark and scary. But when I draw us together in the cave, it's also brave and strong." The third phase of treatment represented the ultimate test, a carefully planned overnight camping trip in the Colorado Rockies. The location was specifically chosen for its low avalanche risk, gentle terrain, and proximity to emergency services. Professional guides would accompany them, and weather conditions would be monitored continuously. Sarah's anxiety peaked as they prepared for this expedition. Despite months of therapy and gradual exposure, the prospect of spending a night on the mountain with her children triggered every protective instinct she possessed. "What if I'm wrong again?" she confided in Dr. Whitefield the night before their departure. "What if my judgment fails them?" "Your judgment didn't fail them the first time," the psychologist reminded her. "You made a reasonable decision based on available information. The avalanche was an unpredictable natural event, not a failure of parenting or planning." The camping trip began with high anxiety but careful preparation. Each family member had practiced their emergency procedures, understood the weather monitoring systems, and knew exactly how to signal for help if needed. Professional guides remained within shouting distance throughout the night. Emma took the lead in setting up their campsite, applying the wilderness skills she had learned with newfound confidence. Her competence reassured the younger children and demonstrated how expertise could replace fear as the foundation for outdoor activities. "Look how much Emma knows now," Jake observed, as his sister efficiently organized their gear. "She's like a real mountain guide." The night passed peacefully, marked by small victories and growing confidence. Josh managed to sleep in the tent without panic attacks. Chloe enjoyed stargazing without being overwhelmed by the darkness. Mia used her improved vision to identify constellations and wildlife. Tyler, as expected, thrived in the outdoor environment, but his enthusiasm was now tempered by appropriate caution. He stayed close to the group, followed safety protocols, and demonstrated that fearlessness could coexist with responsibility. The sunrise on their final morning at Mountain Hope marked more than just the end of their therapeutic program. As the family watched the sun illuminate snow-covered peaks in the distance, they realized they had reclaimed something precious that trauma had threatened to steal forever, their ability to find beauty and peace in nature. "We did it," Sarah said quietly, gathering her children around her as golden light painted the mountainside. "We face our fears and won." But even as they celebrated this victory, Sarah knew their journey wasn't complete. Returning home would bring new challenges as they worked to integrate their healing into everyday life. The real test would be maintaining their progress without the intensive support structure of the therapeutic program. The drive back to Ohio was filled with excited chatter about their mountain experience, but also underlying anxiety about returning to their normal routine. The children had grown accustomed to having therapists and guides available whenever they needed support. Now, they would need to rely more heavily on each other and the coping skills they had developed. "What if I have a nightmare again?" Chloe asked as they crossed into Kansas, still several hours from home. "Then we'll handle it together, just like we always do," Emma replied, her big sister protectiveness stronger than ever. "We know what to do now." Dr. Morrison had warned them that progress in trauma recovery wasn't always linear. They might experience setbacks, especially during stressful periods or anniversary dates related to their ordeal. But they now had tools and strategies for managing these challenges, plus the knowledge that they had already overcome the worst. The Mitchell family's confrontation with their trauma had transformed them in unexpected ways. They had entered the Mountain Hope program as victims seeking to escape their fears. They emerged as survivors who had chosen to face those fears and emerge stronger on the other side. Their story had become more than just one family's recovery. It was a testament to the possibility of post-traumatic growth, the idea that trauma could ultimately lead to increased resilience, deeper relationships, and a more profound appreciation for life. As they headed home to Ohio, they carried with them the confidence that comes from knowing they could survive anything as long as they faced it together. 1 year after their rescue, the Mitchell family stood at the base of Mount Harrison once again, but this time by choice. The anniversary of their avalanche had approached with a mixture of anticipation and dread, each family member processing the milestone differently. Sarah had decided that rather than hiding from this date, they would commemorate it by demonstrating how far they had come. The memorial ceremony they had planned was both deeply personal and surprisingly public. Word of their return had spread through the mountaineering community, and dozens of rescue workers, medical professionals, and fellow survivors had requested permission to attend. What began as a private family ritual had evolved into a celebration of resilience that touched everyone who had been part of their journey. Marcus Thompson, the rescuer who had found them buried beneath the snow, stood beside the Mitchell family as they approached the site where their ordeal had begun. Now a close family friend rather than just their savior, Marcus had become an unofficial uncle to the children, someone who understood their story from a unique perspective. "Are you ready for this?" Marcus asked Sarah quietly as they hiked the familiar trail toward Eagle's Nest viewpoint. The path that had once led to terror now represented triumph over fear. "We're ready," Sarah replied, her voice carrying a confidence that had been hard-won through months of therapy and gradual healing. "We need to reclaim this place." The children's attitudes toward returning to Mount Harrison reflected their individual growth and recovery. Emma, now 15 and transformed into a confident young woman with wilderness first aid certification, had planned many of the safety protocols for their anniversary visit. Her transformation from terrified teenager to capable outdoor leader exemplified the family's journey from victims to survivors. "I've studied the weather patterns for the past month," Emma reported to the group as they hiked. "Current conditions are optimal. Low avalanche risk, Clear skies forecast for the next 48 hours, minimal wind. We couldn't have picked a better day. Jake and Josh, the twins who had been separated by trauma and reunited through healing, walked side by side with an easy companionship that had taken months to rebuild. Josh's claustrophobia had not disappeared entirely, but he had learned to manage it effectively, while Jake had channeled his protective instincts into becoming a certified youth wilderness guide. "Remember when we were scared of our own shadows?" Jake joked as they passed familiar landmarks. "Now Josh knows more about mountain safety than most adults." Josh smiled at his brother's comment, a response that would have been impossible during the darkest days of his recovery. "Fear isn't bad if it keeps you safe," he said, repeating a lesson learned during their therapeutic journey. "It's only bad when it keeps you from living." Mia had become the family's unofficial historian, documenting their recovery journey through detailed journals and artwork that captured not just their trauma, but their transformation. Her vision, fully restored and perhaps even stronger than before, allowed her to see details and nuances that others missed. "I want to draw the viewpoint as it looks today," Mia announced as they climbed. "With all of us here together, healthy and happy. I want to compare it to the drawings I made in the hospital when I could barely remember what the mountain looked like." Chloe, now 7 years old and remarkably resilient, skipped ahead of the group with energy that would have seemed impossible during their buried days. Her recovery had been the most complete, with childhood's natural adaptability allowing her to integrate their traumatic experience without lasting psychological damage. "Can we have a picnic at the top?" Chloe asked excitedly. "A real picnic with sandwiches and everything, not like the pretend food we had in the cave?" Tyler, at 5 years old, retained only fragments of memories from their entrapment, but his recovery from the brain injury had exceeded all medical expectations. His cognitive function had returned completely, and the physical therapy had restored his coordination and motor skills. To look at him now, no one would suspect the severity of his initial injuries. "Will we see where the nice man found us?" Tyler asked, referring to Marcus with the simple acceptance of a child who had never fully understood the danger they had faced. The group that accompanied the Mitchell family included Dr. Rebecca Chen, who had overseen Sarah's medical recovery, Dr. Elizabeth Morrison, the child psychologist who had guided their family therapy, several members of the original rescue team, and a small film crew documenting their story for a therapeutic recovery program. As they reached Eagle's Nest viewpoint, the site of their original disaster, Sarah was struck by how different the landscape appeared. What had once been a pristine white expanse of snow was now late spring green, with wildflowers blooming across meadows where avalanche debris had once been scattered. Nature had healed itself, just as her family had learned to heal. The ceremony they had planned was simple but profound. Each family member read a letter they had written, to their past selves, to the mountain, to the experience that had nearly destroyed them, but ultimately made them stronger. These letters represented closure with their trauma and commitment to their continued growth. Emma's letter was addressed to her 14-year-old self, trapped in the cave and terrified she would lose her entire family. "Dear scared Emma," she read aloud, her voice carrying across the mountain air. "You don't know it yet, but you're braver than you can imagine. You will keep your family safe, and they will keep you safe. The cave isn't the end of your story. It's the beginning of understanding how strong you really are." Josh's letter thanked the mountain for teaching him the difference between reasonable caution and paralyzing fear. "I was angry at you for a long time," he said, looking out over the vista. "But I understand now that you weren't trying to hurt us. You just showed us what we were capable of surviving." Jake addressed his letter to future families who might face similar tragedies. "If you're reading this because something scary happened to your family, I want you to know that it's possible to get better, not just okay, but actually better than you were before. It takes time and it's hard work, but it's possible. Mia's letter was a detailed description of how their experience had changed her relationship with sight and perception. Being in the dark for so long taught me that there are different ways of seeing, she read. Sometimes you see with your eyes, sometimes with your heart, and sometimes with your memory. All of them are important. Chloe's letter was brief but heartfelt. Dear Mountain, thank you for keeping us together. Even when it was scary, we had each other. That's the most important thing I learned. Tyler's contribution was a drawing rather than a letter, a crayon illustration showing 7 stick figures holding hands in front of a mountain with a big yellow sun smiling down on them. This is us now, he explained simply. We're happy. Sarah's letter was the most emotional, addressing not just her children, but all the parents who had supported them through their recovery. To every mother and father reading this, she said, her voice breaking slightly, trust your love. When everything else fails, when all your plans fall apart, when the world becomes dangerous and unpredictable, trust that your love for your children will guide you to the right decisions. It guided me to keep fighting when fighting seemed impossible. Marcus Thompson had been invited to speak as well, representing all the rescue workers and medical professionals who had contributed to their survival and recovery. His remarks focused on the privilege of witnessing their transformation from victims to advocates. When we pulled the Mitchell family from that avalanche, Marcus said, we thought we were just doing our job, saving lives, reuniting a family, providing emergency medical care. We had no idea we were witnessing the beginning of one of the most inspiring recovery stories in mountain rescue history. The formal ceremony concluded with the unveiling of a small memorial plaque that would be installed at the viewpoint. Funded by donations from the Avalanche survival community, the plaque read, in recognition of the Mitchell family, whose courage in survival and healing inspires all who face life's avalanches. May their strength remind us that love and determination can overcome any buried dreams. But the true victory celebration came in the hours that followed, as the Mitchell families simply enjoyed being together in the mountains without fear. They spread blankets for the picnic Chloe had requested, shared stories and laughter, and marveled at how ordinary and pleasant the experience felt. Dr. Morrison observed their interactions with professional interest and personal satisfaction. 6 months ago, getting this family to spend 5 minutes in a simulated snow cave was a major accomplishment, she commented to Dr. Chen. Today, they're having a picnic at the site of their trauma and planning future hiking trips. The children's behavior during the picnic demonstrated the depth of their recovery. They explored the area with appropriate caution, but without anxiety, pointing out geological features and wildlife with genuine enthusiasm. Their conversations included references to their avalanche experience, but as one part of their story, rather than the defining trauma that had once overshadowed everything else. Emma had brought her wilderness first aid kit and demonstrated some of the skills she had learned, teaching the younger children how to identify signs of altitude sickness and hypothermia. Her transformation into a confident outdoor leader had inspired several of her friends to pursue similar training. I want to work in mountain rescue someday, Emma announced as they prepared to hike back down the trail. I want to help other families the way Marcus and his team helped us. Marcus beamed with pride at this declaration. You'd make an excellent rescue worker, he told her. You already understand things that take most people years to learn. The descent from eagles. Nest was celebratory rather than fearful, with the children racing ahead on familiar trails and calling back to share their discoveries. Their comfort in the mountain environment represented a complete transformation from the trauma-induced phobias that had once made even indoor activities challenging. As they reached the parking area where their journey had begun exactly 1 year earlier, Sarah reflected on the magnitude of their transformation. The woman who had brought her children to the mountains seeking healing from their father's death had found something far more profound, an understanding of their collective strength and an unshakable bond forged in the crucible of survival. The drive back to their hotel was filled with excited planning for future adventures. The children discussed upcoming camping trips, wilderness skills they wanted to learn, and places they hoped to explore. Their enthusiasm for outdoor activities demonstrated that they had not just overcome their trauma, but had developed a deeper appreciation for nature and adventure. "Can we come back next year?" Chloe asked as they watched the mountains recede. "In the rearview mirror, for our 2-year anniversary?" "We'll come back whenever you want," Sarah promised. "This is our mountain now. We're part of its story, and it's part of ours." That evening, the family gathered in their hotel room to review the video documentation from their anniversary ceremony. Watching themselves speak confidently about their experience, seeing their easy interactions with the rescue team, and observing their children's natural comfort in the mountain environment provided powerful evidence of their recovery. Tyler fell asleep during the video review, curled up against Sarah's side with the easy trust of a child who had never doubted his safety. His peaceful sleep in the shadow of the mountain that had nearly claimed his life represented perhaps the greatest victory of all: innocence restored and childhood reclaimed. Emma stayed up late that night, video calling with friends back home, to share pictures and stories from their anniversary celebration. Her confidence in discussing their experience, her obvious pride in their family's resilience, and her excitement about future mountain adventures demonstrated how completely she had integrated their trauma into a positive identity. The twins spent the evening planning their next wilderness adventure, poring over trail maps and discussing equipment needs with the expertise of experienced hikers. Their easy collaboration and shared enthusiasm showed how their bond had been strengthened rather than damaged by their shared ordeal. Mia worked on a new art project inspired by their anniversary ceremony, creating a detailed landscape that captured both the beauty and the danger of the mountain environment. Her artistic processing of their experience continued to provide valuable therapeutic benefits while creating a visual record of their healing journey. As Sarah tucked her children into their hotel beds that night, she marveled at how far they had all traveled, not just geographically, but emotionally and psychologically. The family that had been broken by tragedy and trauma had been rebuilt stronger than before, with deeper appreciation for life, love, and each other. Their victory was complete not because they had forgotten their trauma, but because they had transformed it from a source of fear into a foundation of strength. The mountain had tested them to their limits and found them unbreakable. Their love for each other had proven stronger than avalanches, more enduring than injury, and more powerful than fear itself. The weeks following their anniversary celebration brought unexpected opportunities that validated their transformation in profound ways. Sarah received a call from the National Institute of Mental Health, requesting the Mitchell family's participation in a groundbreaking research study on post-traumatic growth in family systems. Their remarkable recovery had attracted attention from trauma specialists across the country who wanted to understand the factors that enabled some families to not just survive catastrophic events, but emerge stronger. "Your family's experience challenges everything we thought we knew about trauma recovery timelines," explained Dr. Patricia Kellerman, the lead researcher on the project. "Most families facing similar circumstances show improvement over years, not months. Your accelerated healing and enhanced functioning suggest protective factors we haven't fully identified." The research opportunity excited Emma particularly, as it aligned with her growing interest in psychology and emergency medicine. At 15, She was already taking advanced placement courses and volunteering with local emergency medical services, inspired by the professionals who had saved her family. "I want to understand why we survived when others might not have," Emma told the researchers during their initial interview. "If there's something about how we handled the crisis that could help other families, I want to be part of discovering that." The study involved detailed interviews with each family member, psychological assessments, measuring resilience and coping strategies, and analysis of their communication patterns during both crisis and recovery. Researchers were particularly interested in Sarah's decision-making process during their entrapment and the children's various adaptation mechanisms. Josh's insights proved especially valuable to the research team. His experience with claustrophobia and subsequent recovery provided a window into how children process and overcome environment-specific trauma. His detailed journal entries from the recovery period offered researchers unprecedented documentation of a young person's healing journey. "At first, I thought I was broken because closed spaces made me panic," Josh explained to Dr. Kellerman. "But my therapist helped me understand that my brain was just trying to protect me. Once I learned to work with my fear instead of fighting it, everything changed." The research process itself became therapeutic for the family, providing opportunities to reflect on their growth and articulate the lessons they had learned. Mia's artistic documentation served as visual evidence of their transformation, with her drawings showing clear progression from dark, chaotic images to bright, hopeful compositions. "Art saved me when words weren't enough," Mia told the researchers, displaying a series of paintings that chronicled their journey. "When I couldn't explain how I felt, I could paint it. When I couldn't remember being strong, I could draw strength into existence." Jake's role as the family's emotional barometer had evolved into genuine leadership skills that impressed the research team. His ability to read family dynamics and intervene when tensions arose demonstrated sophisticated emotional intelligence that had developed through their shared crisis. "Jake has become our early warning system for stress," Sarah observed during one research session. "He can sense when someone is struggling before they even realize it themselves. That skill kept us connected when we might have isolated ourselves in our individual healing." Chloe's resilience continued to amaze mental health professionals studying childhood trauma recovery. Her ability to integrate their catastrophic experience into a coherent life narrative, despite her young age, provided insights into the protective factors that help children bounce back from adversity. "The cave was scary, but we were brave together," Chloe explained to researchers with 7-year-old clarity. "Now I know that being scared doesn't mean being weak. It just means you need your family extra much." Tyler's complete cognitive recovery defied medical predictions and offered hope to families dealing with pediatric brain injuries. His neuroplasticity had been enhanced by the intensive family support and stimulation he received during recovery, demonstrating the importance of environmental factors in healing. "Tyler's recovery exceeded our most optimistic projections," reported Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the pediatric neurologist who had overseen his treatment. His case is being studied by medical schools as an example of how family involvement can optimize healing outcomes. The research findings began generating interest from international trauma recovery organizations. The Mitchell family was invited to present their story at conferences in Canada, the United Kingdom, and Australia, where their insights could benefit families facing similar challenges worldwide. Sarah initially hesitated about the international speaking opportunities, concerned about exposing her children to additional scrutiny. But a family meeting revealed unanimous enthusiasm for sharing their story on a broader scale. "If our experience can help just one other family get through something terrible, then everything we went through had meaning," Emma argued persuasively. "We have a responsibility to use our story for good." The first international presentation took place at the World Conference on Trauma Recovery in Toronto, where the Mitchell family addressed an audience of over 2,000 mental health professionals, survivors and family advocates. Their presentation combined Sarah's perspective as a parent, navigating crisis, with the children's insights about sibling support and resilience. The response was overwhelming. Conference attendees described their presentation as the most inspiring session in the event's 20-year history. Mental health professionals requested copies of their presentation materials to use in training programs. Survivor families approached them afterward to share their own stories and express gratitude for the hope the Mitchells provided. "You showed us that it's possible to not just survive trauma, but to transform it into something beautiful," one conference attendee told Sarah after their presentation. "My family has been struggling for 3 years since our house fire. Hearing your story gives me hope that we can get to the other side of this." The international attention led to book offers from major publishers interested in documenting their survival and recovery story. After careful consideration and family discussion, they decided to work with a publisher specializing in inspirational non-fiction, with proceeds designated for mountain rescue organizations and family trauma recovery programs. Emma took the lead in organizing the book project, working with a professional writer to ensure their story was told accurately and sensitively. Her maturity and insight impressed everyone involved in the publishing process, with several editors commenting that her perspective would make the book particularly valuable for teenage readers facing their own challenges. Emma has become the family spokesperson in many ways, observed Dr. Morrison during one of their ongoing therapy sessions. Her ability to articulate their experience while remaining sensitive to her siblings' privacy needs shows remarkable emotional maturity. The book writing process provided opportunities for deeper family conversations about their experience and its meaning. Each family member contributed chapters from their perspective, creating a multi-dimensional narrative that captured the complexity of their shared trauma and recovery. Josh's chapters about overcoming claustrophobia became some of the most powerful sections of the book, offering practical strategies for readers dealing with specific phobias. His honest discussion of setbacks and breakthroughs provided realistic hope for families struggling with similar challenges. "Recovery isn't a straight line," Josh wrote in one particularly insightful passage. "Some days I felt like I was back at the beginning, scared of my own shadow. But each time I worked through the fear, I got a little stronger. Eventually the good days outnumbered the bad ones." Jake's contributions focused on the importance of maintaining hope and humor during difficult times. His natural optimism, which had sustained the family during their darkest moments, translated into practical advice for families facing their own crises. "Laughter isn't disrespectful to your problems," Jake wrote. "Sometimes it's the only thing that keeps you sane. Finding something to smile about doesn't mean you're not taking your situation seriously. It means you're refusing to let it destroy your spirit." Mia's artistic contributions to the book created a visual narrative that complemented the written text. Her before and after drawings provided powerful evidence of transformation, while her technique explanations offered therapeutic activities for other young trauma survivors. Art gives you permission to feel everything without having to explain it to anyone else, Mia wrote in her artist statement. "When adults asked me how I was feeling, I didn't have words, but I could show them through my pictures, and that was enough." Chloe's sections, dictated to a transcriber due to her age, captured the wisdom that children often possess about resilience and adaptation. Her simple observations about family love and mutual support provided some of the book's most moving passages. "Families stick together like puzzle pieces," Chloe explained in one memorable quote. "Even when you get all mixed up and scattered, you still fit together perfectly when you find each other again." Tyler's contribution was primarily visual, photographs and drawings that showed his complete recovery and continued development. His obvious health and happiness provided powerful evidence that even severe trauma could be overcome with proper support and medical care. The book's publication generated renewed media attention, but this time the Mitchell family felt prepared to handle the spotlight. Their media training, provided by the publisher, helped them stay focused on their message of hope and recovery while protecting their privacy and emotional well-being. Television interviews, radio appearances, and podcast discussions amplified their stories' reach, connecting them with survivor families around the world. Social media messages poured in from people who had found inspiration and practical guidance in their example. "Your story saved my family," read one typical message. "We were falling apart after our car accident, but reading about your recovery showed us that it was possible to heal together instead of separately. Thank you for giving us hope." The Mitchell family's transformation from trauma victims to international advocates represented the ultimate victory over their circumstances. They had not simply survived their Avalanche ordeal, they had used it as a foundation for building something meaningful and lasting that would benefit countless other families facing their own mountains of challenge. 6 months after their book publication, the family established the Mitchell Foundation for Family Trauma Recovery, a non-profit organization dedicated to providing resources, support, and hope to families navigating crisis and recovery. The foundation's programs included family therapy scholarships, wilderness therapy experiences, and educational resources for mental health professionals. "We didn't choose what happened to us on Mount Harrison," Sarah explained at the foundation's launch event, "but we chose what to do with it afterward. That choice made all the difference between being victims and becoming victors." Their victory was now complete in every sense. Personal healing achieved, family bonds strengthened, and a legacy created that would help other families for generations to come. The mountain that had once threatened to bury them had instead elevated them to heights they never could have imagined, proving that even the most devastating avalanches cannot bury the human spirit when it is anchored in love. 5 years after the avalanche that nearly claimed their lives, the Mitchell family gathered at Denver International Airport, preparing to board a flight to Nepal. Emma, now 20 years old and a junior at Colorado State University, studying emergency medicine and wilderness therapy, carried certification documents for her role as assistant expedition leader. Their destination was the Himalayas, where they would spend 3 weeks working with Sherpa families to develop mountain safety protocols for international climbing expeditions. The journey from victims buried in snow to international mountain safety consultants represented a transformation so complete that even those who had witnessed their recovery found it remarkable. Sarah, now 38 and holding a master's degree in family crisis counseling, had become one of the country's most sought-after experts on trauma recovery and family resilience. 5 years ago, I couldn't imagine leaving Ohio, let alone traveling to the world's highest mountains, Sarah reflected as they waited for their flight. Now we're heading to Nepal to help prevent other families from experiencing what we went through. The Himalayan expedition was the culmination of years of advocacy work and professional development. The Mitchell Foundation had partnered with the Nepal Mountaineering Association to create comprehensive safety training programs for families and guides working in high-altitude environments. Their unique perspective as avalanche survivors who had overcome their trauma made them invaluable consultants for mountain safety initiatives. Emma's evolution into a mountain safety expert had surprised no one who knew her story. After completing wilderness first aid certification at 16, she progressed through increasingly advanced training programs, earning her emergency medical technician license, wilderness therapy credentials, and expedition leadership certification. Her thesis, Research on family dynamics during mountain emergencies was being published in the Journal of Wilderness Medicine. "Emma has become the expert I wish we'd had access to during our crisis," said Dr. Rebecca Martinez, who had mentored Emma through her university studies. Her combination of personal experience, academic knowledge, and natural leadership ability is extraordinary. The twins, Jake and Josh, now 17 years old, had chosen different paths that reflected their individual growth from their shared trauma. Jake was completing his senior year as valedictorian while working part-time with the local search and rescue team. His application to MIT for aerospace engineering had been accepted, with plans to develop improved emergency location technology for remote area rescues. Josh had discovered a passion for meteorology and climate science, fascinated by the weather patterns that create avalanche conditions. His high school research project on climate change impacts on mountain stability had won state science fair competitions and earned him early admission to the University of Colorado's atmospheric science program. "The avalanche taught me to respect weather in ways most people never understand," Josh explained to reporters interviewing the family before their Nepal departure. "I want to help predict dangerous conditions so other families don't face what we faced." Mia, now 14 and an accomplished artist, had been commissioned to create a series of paintings documenting their Himalayan expedition. Her artwork had evolved from therapeutic processing tools to professional quality pieces that were exhibited in galleries and used to raise funds for mountain safety programs. Several of her paintings hung in the offices of search and rescue organizations across Colorado. Mia's art has become a universal language for trauma recovery, observed Dr. Elizabeth Morrison, who continued to work with families using techniques developed during the Mitchell family's treatment. Her visual narratives help other survivors understand that transformation is possible. 12-year-old Chloe had developed into a confident young woman whose resilience inspired everyone she met. Her involvement with youth mountain safety education programs had made her something of a celebrity among Colorado's climbing community. She was often invited to speak at summer camps and youth organizations about outdoor safety and family teamwork. Chloe can explain complex safety concepts in ways that kids immediately understand, noted Rebecca Martinez, who often collaborated with Chloe on educational programs. Her ability to make safety training fun and memorable is a gift that's already saved lives. Tyler, now 10 years old, showed no lasting effects from his severe brain injury, except for an enhanced appreciation for family togetherness and an uncanny ability to read weather patterns. His complete recovery had been documented in medical journals as an example of optimal pediatric trauma rehabilitation, and he regularly participated in research studies on childhood brain plasticity. "Tyler represents hope for every family dealing with pediatric brain injury," said Dr. Jennifer Walsh, who had overseen his neurological recovery. "His case demonstrates that with proper support and intervention, even severe injuries can be overcome completely." The flight to Nepal was filled with excited planning and preparation. The family reviewed their mission objectives, training Sherpa guides in family-specific rescue techniques, developing safety protocols for expeditions with children, and creating educational materials that could prevent avalanche tragedies. Their work would combine the Mitchell family's experiential knowledge with cutting-edge mountain safety research. Their arrival in Kathmandu marked the beginning of an adventure that would have been unthinkable during their darkest days, buried beneath Mount Harrison. The contrast between their current confidence and capability and their former helplessness served as a powerful reminder of how completely they had transformed their relationship with mountains and danger. The Sherpa community welcomed them with a ceremony recognizing their status as avalanche survivors who had dedicated their lives to preventing similar tragedies. Tenzing Norgay Sherpa, grandson of the famous Everest climber, presented them with traditional kata scarves, blessed for safe mountain travel. Your story of survival and transformation brings honor to all who work in the mountains, Tenzing said during the welcome ceremony. The knowledge you share with our community will protect many families in the years to come. Emma immediately began working with experienced Sherpa guides to develop new rescue protocols specifically designed for family groups. Her research had identified communication strategies and group management techniques that could significantly improve survival rates during mountain emergencies. Families behave differently from individual climbers or professional expeditions, Emma explained to the assembled guides. Understanding those differences can mean the difference between successful rescue and tragedy. The training sessions combined traditional Sherpa mountain wisdom with modern emergency medical techniques. Emma's ability to translate complex medical procedures into practical, field-applicable skills impressed even the most experienced guides, many of whom had decades of high-altitude rescue experience. Sarah focused on developing psychological first aid protocols for family trauma situations. Her work with Sherpa community leaders addressed the unique challenges of providing emotional support to family groups experiencing crises in remote mountain environments. Physical rescue is only the beginning, Sarah explained during a training session with local medical volunteers. Families need emotional and psychological support to prevent long-term trauma from developing into permanent dysfunction. The twins contributed their specialized knowledge to the expedition's technical aspects. Jake's engineering background helped improve emergency shelter construction techniques, while Josh's meteorological expertise enhanced weather prediction capabilities for the region's climbing operations. Mia documented their work through detailed sketches and paintings that captured both the technical aspects of their training programs and the human connections being formed between the Mitchell family and their Sherpa hosts. Her artistic record would become part of the permanent training materials developed during their visit. Chloe's natural ability to connect with children made her invaluable for developing youth safety education programs. She worked with Sherpa children to create games and activities that taught mountain safety concepts in engaging, memorable ways. Her workshops became so popular that neighboring villages requested similar programs. Tyler, despite his young age, contributed an important perspective on child-friendly safety equipment and procedures. His input helped designers create emergency gear specifically sized and designed for children, addressing a significant gap in mountain safety equipment. The 3 weeks in Nepal produced remarkable results. The training programs they developed were immediately implemented by local guide services, and preliminary data suggested significant improvements in emergency response times and family group safety outcomes. The educational materials they created were translated into multiple languages for distribution throughout the Himalayan climbing community. The Mitchell family's contribution to mountain safety cannot be overstated, reported Dr. Pemba Sherpa, director of the Nepal Mountain Medicine Association. Their work here will prevent tragedies and save lives for generations to come. But perhaps the most significant transformation occurred within the family itself. Working together in the mountains that had once represented terror, they discovered a new level of confidence and capability that solidified their identity as survivors who had become leaders in their field. The flight home from Nepal was filled with reflection on how far they had traveled, both geographically and emotionally. The family that had once been buried helplessly beneath an avalanche had just completed a mission that would protect countless other families from similar fates. I keep thinking about that moment in the cave when I thought we were all going to die, Sarah said, as their plane crossed the Pacific Ocean. If someone had told me then that 5 years later we'd be international mountain safety experts, I would have thought they were insane, Emma's response captured the essence of their transformation. "We didn't survive that avalanche to go back to being ordinary. We survived it to become something extraordinary." Upon returning to Colorado, the family was greeted by media attention and professional recognition that validated their international work. The American Alpine Club presented them with its highest honor for contributions to mountain safety, while the International Association of Mountain Rescue Teams invited them to establish permanent training programs based on their Nepal experience. The Mitchell Foundation had grown during their absence, with donation levels reaching the point where they could fund multiple family therapy programs and wilderness recovery expeditions simultaneously. Their story continued to inspire families worldwide, with translation rights for their book selling in over 30 countries. Emma's acceptance into medical school with a full scholarship for her wilderness medicine research represented the culmination of her academic and professional development. Her senior thesis on family trauma recovery in remote environments was being used as a textbook in multiple university programs. "Emma has transformed from victim to healer to leader," observed Dr. Patricia Kellerman, who had initially studied their recovery for her research. "Her journey represents the ultimate example of post-traumatic growth, achieving its full potential." The twins' college preparations reflected their individual passions while maintaining their commitment to mountain safety advocacy. Jake's engineering projects focused on developing better emergency communication technology, while Josh's meteorological research continued examining climate change impacts on avalanche formation and frequency. Maya's artistic career had evolved beyond therapeutic processing to professional recognition, with her mountain safety illustrations being used by rescue organizations worldwide. Her latest series, depicting family resilience in extreme environments, was being exhibited at the Denver Art Museum, with proceeds supporting mountain rescue operations. Chloe's youth education programs had expanded to include schools across the Mountain West, where her presentations on outdoor safety and family teamwork were credited with preventing several potential accidents. Her natural teaching ability and authentic enthusiasm made complex safety concepts accessible to children who might otherwise ignore such instruction. Tyler's continued participation in brain injury research provided ongoing insights into childhood, resilience, and recovery factors. His case remained one of the most complete recoveries on record, offering hope to families facing similar medical challenges. As autumn arrived in Colorado, marking the approach of their avalanche anniversary, the Mitchell family faced the future with confidence and purpose that would have been unimaginable during their buried days. Their transformation from victims to victors was complete, but their mission to help others facing similar challenges was just beginning. The mountain that had once threatened to end their story had instead provided the foundation for a new narrative of resilience, growth, and service to others. Their love for each other, tested in the crucible of survival, had emerged stronger and more purposeful, dedicated to ensuring that no other family would face their ordeal alone or without hope. The avalanche that buried them for 9 days had ultimately lifted them to heights of purpose and meaning they never could have achieved without their shared trial. In transforming their trauma into triumph, they had discovered that the greatest victories come not from avoiding life's avalanches, but from learning to climb out of them together, stronger and more committed to helping others do the same. Their story would continue, not as victims who survived, but as leaders who thrived, proving that families united by love and strengthened by adversity can overcome any mountain that stands in their way. The avalanche had ended one chapter of their lives, but it had begun an even more remarkable story of transformation, service, and hope that would inspire generations of families facing their own moments of being buried by life's unexpected storms. 10 years after their rescue, Sarah Mitchell stood before the United Nations General Assembly in New York, delivering the keynote address for International Day for Disaster Risk Reduction. Her speech, titled "From Buried to Building: How Family Resilience Can Transform Global Emergency Response," represented the culmination of a decade-long journey from personal tragedy to international advocacy. Distinguished delegates, Sarah began, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had lived through an unimaginable crisis and emerged stronger. Disaster preparedness is not just about infrastructure and technology. It's about understanding that the most powerful force in any emergency is the human capacity for love, protection, and mutual support. The audience of world leaders, disaster response experts, and humanitarian organizations listened intently as Sarah outlined the Mitchell family's comprehensive approach to emergency preparedness that had been adopted by rescue organizations in 47 countries. Their protocols, developed through years of research and field testing, had documented success rates that exceeded traditional emergency response methods by remarkable margins. Emma, now Dr. Emma Mitchell at age 25, sat in the front row wearing her Doctors Without Borders uniform. She had just returned from a 6-month mission in Nepal, where she had established the world's first high-altitude family trauma treatment center. Her medical expertise, combined with her unique background as an avalanche survivor, made her one of the most effective emergency physicians working in extreme environments. The previous month, Emma had successfully coordinated the rescue and treatment of a Swiss family caught in an unexpected blizzard on Everest's north face. Her calm leadership during the 72-hour rescue operation had saved 6 lives, and demonstrated the practical application of everything the Mitchell family had learned about crisis management and family support systems. Dr. Mitchell's approach revolutionized our understanding of family-centered emergency medicine, reported Dr. Klaus Weber, director of the International Mountain Medicine Association. Her protocols have become the gold standard for treating family groups in wilderness emergencies. Jake and Josh, now 22 years old, had achieved remarkable success in their respective fields while maintaining their commitment to mountain safety. Advancement. Jake's MIT engineering degree had led to the development of revolutionary avalanche detection systems that were being installed throughout the world's major mountain ranges. His technology had already prevented dozens of potential disasters by providing early warning systems for unstable snow conditions. Josh had completed his PhD in atmospheric science at the University of Colorado, specializing in the climate patterns that create avalanche conditions. His doctoral research had resulted in predictive models that extended avalanche forecasting accuracy from 24 hours to nearly a week, giving rescue teams unprecedented preparation time for potential emergencies. The Mitchell twins have transformed mountain safety from reactive response to proactive prevention, noted Dr. Sandra Chen, director of the World Meteorological Organization's Mountain Weather Division. Their combined expertise in engineering and atmospheric science has created safety improvements we never thought possible. Mia, now 19 and a sophomore at the Rhode Island School of Design, had evolved from therapeutic artist to internationally recognized illustrator and documentary filmmaker. Her latest project, a full-length documentary titled "Buried: A Family's Journey from Darkness to Light," had won the Academy Award for Best Documentary Feature, bringing their story to global audiences in unprecedented detail. The documentary's success had generated over $50 million in donations to mountain rescue organizations worldwide, funding equipment upgrades, training programs, and research initiatives that continued to save lives daily. Mia's artistic vision had transformed their personal story into a universal message of hope and resilience. Mia Mitchell has the rare ability to translate complex emotional experiences into visual narratives that speak to people across all cultural and linguistic barriers, observed documentary critic Roger Hartwell. Her work demonstrates how art can become a powerful force for social change and humanitarian improvement. Chloe, now 17 and preparing for college, had become the youngest certified wilderness rescue instructor in Colorado history. Her youth education programs had expanded internationally, with mountain communities from the Alps to the Andes requesting her innovative safety training curricula. Universities were already competing to recruit her for their outdoor education and emergency management programs. Chloe Mitchell has redefined how we teach safety to young people, said Professor Maria Santos of the University of Colorado's Outdoor Recreation Program. Her peer-to-peer teaching methods achieve retention rates that traditional adult instruction simply cannot match. Tyler, now 15 years old, had not only maintained his complete recovery from his childhood brain injury, but had developed exceptional abilities in pattern recognition and weather forecasting that defied scientific explanation. Meteorologists studying his cases suggested that his brain injury and subsequent healing had created neural pathways that enhanced his environmental awareness beyond normal human capabilities. Tyler can predict weather changes hours before our most sophisticated instruments detect them, reported Dr. Michael Torres, the meteorologist who had been studying Tyler's abilities for 3 years. His case is rewriting our understanding of how brain trauma can sometimes result in enhanced rather than diminished capabilities. The Mitchell Foundation had grown into a $200 million organization operating in 60 countries, providing comprehensive support for families affected by natural disasters. Their programs included immediate emergency response, long-term trauma therapy, educational initiatives, and research funding that continued to advance the field of family-centered disaster recovery. The Mitchell Foundation represents the gold standard for disaster relief organizations, stated Jennifer Rodriguez, director of the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies. Their holistic approach to family support has become the model that other humanitarian organizations strive to emulate. Marcus Thompson, now 38 and director of the International Mountain Rescue Association, often reflected on how finding one buried family had led to transformations that had saved thousands of others. His friendship with the Mitchell family had evolved into a professional partnership that had revolutionized rescue operations worldwide. When I pulled Sarah and her children from that avalanche 10 years ago, I thought I was ending their story, Marcus said during a recent interview. I had no idea I was actually beginning a story that would change how the world responds to disasters and supports families in crisis. As Sarah concluded her address to the United Nations, she shared a final reflection that captured the essence of their extraordinary journey. 10 years ago, my family and I were buried beneath 20 feet of snow, facing certain death. Today, we stand before you not as victims who survived, but as proof that the human spirit, when anchored in love and supported by hope, can transform even the most devastating experiences into sources of strength that benefit all humanity. The standing ovation that followed lasted nearly 10 minutes, with delegates from around the world recognizing not just Sarah's words, but the remarkable transformation of an entire family that had refused to let tragedy define their legacy. Their story had become more than survival. It had become a blueprint for how families, communities, and nations could face any crisis with courage, unity, and unshakable determination to emerge stronger together. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.